What happens when a rising political star is filmed doing something he never wanted to show to the public? For JD Vance, a simple act turned into a political and media storm that threatened everything he had built. Before we dive further, make sure to watch the entire story and see the full clip at the end. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. JD Vance had spent years crafting an image, tough, no nonsense, a man of the people who didn't back down. He spoke with conviction, called things as he saw them, and rarely, if ever, let his guard slip in public. But on this particular evening, inside a small upscale restaurant in Cincinnati, something shifted. The dinner was meant to be private, a gathering of close allies, donors, and a few influential figures. It was the kind of event where conversations flowed freely behind closed doors. Vance wasn't delivering a speech or taking questions. This was a safe space, or at least that's what he thought. The restaurant was dimly lit and exclusive, catering to those who valued discretion. It wasn't the kind of place where people pulled out their phones to record, yet somehow, someone did. A small, nearly imperceptible security camera mounted above the bar captured everything, every glance, every word, every moment. Vance let his guard down. At first, the recording showed nothing out of the ordinary: laughter, drinks clinking, the occasional hand gesture as he spoke. But then the conversation shifted. Vance leaned in, lowering his voice just slightly. The people around him did the same. He was speaking freely now, no rehearsed lines, no political polish. His words were casual, almost careless, the way someone speaks when they think no one is listening beyond their immediate circle. And then he said it, a remark, pointed, specific, unmistakable, the kind of statement that couldn't be walked back. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't taken out of context. It was clear, unfiltered, and dangerously revealing. The reaction around tea. But things like this don't stay hidden forever. When the video finally surfaced, there was no way to bury it. It started small. A blurry, low-resolution clip appeared on an obscure online forum. No context, no captions, just grainy footage of JD Vance sitting at a restaurant table, speaking in hushed tones. At first, no one paid much attention. A handful of users speculated about what he was saying, but the audio was too muffled to be certain. Then, someone enhanced it. Within hours, a clearer version of the video appeared. Someone had isolated the audio, cleaned up the background noise, and sharpened the image just enough to remove any doubt. JD Vance's voice was unmistakable. His words were now crisp and clear. It wasn't a deep fake. It wasn't manipulated. It was real. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere, on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Each platform dissected it from different angles. News outlets picked it up, looping the footage in their reports and pairing it with headlines designed to spark outrage or disbelief. Caught on camera, what JD Vance didn't want you to see. Leaked footage exposes JD Vance's true thoughts, and the video that could end JD Vance's career. At first, the responses were mixed. His supporters immediately dismissed it as an out-of-context hit job. This is nothing, they argued, just another smear attempt by the media. But others weren't so sure. The clip was damning, and no matter how people tried to spin it, the words were there, clear and unfiltered. Cable news ran wall-to-wall coverage. Experts were brought in to analyze every detail. The body language, the tone, the expressions of those around him. Commentators debated the potential fallout. Could he recover? Would this hurt his chances in the next election? The clip played on repeat, with each airing bringing new theories and angles. Some speculated on the identity of the person who leaked it. Was it a restaurant employee? A political rival? Someone inside his own circle? Within hours, for JD Vance's supporters, the video was just another manufactured controversy, another attempt by the so-called establishment to silence an outsider. They flooded social media, dismissing the footage as overblown, taken out of context, or a desperate smear campaign. Some insisted the audio had been doctored. Others argued that even if it was real, it was nothing more than a private conversation, not meant for public scrutiny. A few well-known figures on his side appeared on television, shaking their heads at what they called a political witch hunt. Are we really at a point, one commentator argued, where a man can't speak freely over dinner without someone secretly recording him? This is insane, but his critics weren't letting it go. To them, the clip was confirmation of everything they'd always suspected. This wasn't an attack, it was an unveiling. They dissected every second of the table, capturing the expressions of those listening to him, their body language, their subtle reactions. The difference was stark. This second clip showed not just JD Vance's words, but the way people at the table responded to them. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uncomfortable, a few even exchanged glances as if they were realizing just how far Vance had let his guard down. The reactions painted a new layer of meaning, suggesting that the conversation had struck a nerve with those present, perhaps even creating divisions among them. "This is much worse," one of the senior advisors muttered, his voice tight with frustration. The second clip, with its added context, felt even more damaging. The raw, unfiltered nature of the footage now felt undeniable. No amount of spin could cover the fact that this was more than a private conversation. It was something that was now going to define how the public saw Vance. His team huddled around the screen, trying to make sense of the situation. The second clip had already started spreading across the internet, and this. "We can't ignore this," JD Vance's campaign manager said, his voice heavy. "This is bigger than just a viral video. This is turning into a full-blown media firestorm. We need to figure out a way to take control of the narrative, and fast." JD finally stood up, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. His campaign manager had been right. The internet moved fast, and what had started as a small clip was now a political earthquake, shaking everything in its path. But JD couldn't afford to stay silent any longer. The damage was already done. It was time to decide how he would respond. In the hours that followed, his team scrambled to come up with a strategy. They could attempt to discredit the footage, claiming it had been selectively edited, or they could double down and admit that the remarks were made in a private setting, offering a defense of the context. But the deeper they delved into the situation, the more they realized that JD's next move could either salvage his career or bury it. As the media continued to spin the narrative, JD Vance had to confront the uncomfortable truth. The candid, off-the-record moments he had shared at that dinner were now public, and how he handled the fallout would define his political future. But in that moment, the decision was in his hands. What would he choose? Some of the people at his table looked entertained, others uncomfortable. One man noticeably looked away. A woman folded her arms and shifted in her seat. "This changes everything," and Aide whispered. The new footage didn't just capture JD's words, it exposed the people around him, some nodding, others barely concealing their unease. And then at the very end of the clip were now divided. Some continued to defend him, claiming that the media was taking everything out of context. But others began to question if the man they thought they knew was really who he appeared to be. The video had peeled back the polished veneer, exposing a side of JD Vance that many hadn't anticipated, and couldn't ignore. The media, of course, had a field day. Hours of analysis, talk show segments, and panel discussions dedicated to dissecting every word, every gesture. News outlets aired the second clip in heavy rotation, each time with new analysis and new angles. Commentators asked whether this moment would be Vance's political undoing. Was this just a bump in the road, or the beginning of the end? As JD sat in the meeting room, facing his team and advisors, the pressure mounted. The news was bad, the donors were pulling back, and the public was in a frenzy. His mind raced as he weighed his options: how to respond, what tone to take, whether to apologize, or if standing his ground was the better choice. Every possible path seemed fraught with peril. "Do we go full force into damage control?" his campaign manager asked, breaking the silence. "We could start calling people, trying to make sure this doesn't snowball." JD rubbed his temples, his mind clouded with frustration. "We need more than damage control. We need a message that sticks. One that stops this before it gets worse." His campaign manager nodded. "But you need to speak soon. If you don't, it'll only make it worse. The longer you stay silent, the more they control the narrative." JD looked at the group, his face hardening. The decisions weren't easy, but one thing was clear: he couldn't afford to let this spiral out of his control. Yet, there was something else eating at him. What if his words, captured on that footage, were too damaging? Could he really recover from this? His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of his phone buzzing. A new message. He picked it up, read the brief text, and then dropped it in his lap. The news from the donors had just gotten worse. The silence was deafening. The money was slipping away. "How bad is it?" JD finally asked, his voice quieter than he intended. "Two big donors are reconsidering their support," his senior, apologetically. "One is pulling out completely, and another one wants to wait and see how you handle this before making any more commitments." JD's stomach sank. The financial foundation of his campaign, the lifeblood that kept him competitive, was crumbling before his eyes. Without those donors, his political future would be in jeopardy. That was the part no one wanted to admit, but everyone feared. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. But now, as the pressure mounted, he found himself at a crossroads. The very thing he had built his reputation on, his unyielding stance, was now the thing that might tear him down. It felt like a betrayal to his core beliefs, but reality was starting to set in. If he didn't act quickly, everything he had worked for would slip through his fingers. His campaign manager paced the room, urging him to act. "We can't afford to be stubborn on this one. The longer you wait, the more ground we lose. We need to control the narrative, or someone else will." JD ran a hand through his hair, tension building in his chest. He knew the stakes. He knew that if he chose the wrong path, it could be the end of his political career. But if he gave in and apologized, he risked losing everything he had stood for, the image of the tough, no-nonsense outsider who didn't back down, who didn't cave to the political elite. But as the days passed, the fallout grew. The media was relentless, the polls were dipping, and even some of his most ardent supporters were starting to waver. If the scandal had been a spark, it was quickly becoming a wildfire. And with the latest message from one of his biggest donors, the fire was only growing hotter. He stared at his phone for a moment, considering the weight of the decision. This was it. The choice he made now would define everything. Apologize and risk looking weak, or double down and risk losing the support of key donors and voters who were now questioning his integrity. The clock was ticking. His campaign. JD finally exhaled sharply and stood up from his desk. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror across the room, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had never imagined he'd be here, caught in a battle for his political future, caught between the man he was and the man the public expected him to be. His voice was steady, though his mind was swirling. "I'll handle it. But if we go down fighting. I'm not going to crawl back. I built everything I have by standing my ground. I'm not changing that now." His campaign manager gave him a quick nod, understanding the resolve in JD's voice. But the reality was clear. No matter how hard JD fought, the consequences of his words, and the reactions from the people around him, had already set the wheels of public opinion in motion. The decision to apologize or fight back wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about JD's identity, his sense of self, and whether he could recover from a mistake that, to many, wasn't just a slip-up but a window into who he really was. Could JD Vance salvage his reputation, or would this be the moment that defined his political career, his undoing in the public eye? Time was running out. The next move would be his. But as he sat in front of the camera, preparing to address the nation, he realized something. This wasn't about strength anymore. This was about survival. His advisors had gone back and forth over the wording of his statement. Should it be a full apology, a deflection, a carefully crafted explanation? The problem was, no matter what he said, someone would pick it apart. He took a deep breath, looked straight into the camera, and started speaking. "The past few days have been difficult," he began, his voice steady. "A private conversation was recorded without my knowledge, and it has sparked a national debate." 4537. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Some people were disappointed, some were angry, and I understand why. It was the closest he would get to admitting fault. His team had made sure of that. The statement had been rehearsed and refined, every word weighed against potential backlash. But as soon as the video was posted, the internet did what it always did. Some praised him for addressing the controversy head-on. Others mocked him for what they saw as a half-hearted attempt at damage control. His critics called it insincere. His supporters said he should have never responded at all. In the media, they dissected every pause, every shift in tone, every flicker of emotion. Too little, too late, one headline read. "Vance tries to put out the fire. Did it work? Damage control or political theater?" His poll numbers remained shaky. The donors who had been reconsidering their support stayed silent, and the people who had been on the fence about him now had a reason to step off, one way or the other. But the real fallout wasn't just political. It was personal. Friends he'd known for years stopped answering his calls. Allies within his party kept their distance, waiting to see if he would recover before publicly siding with him again. The world of politics was ruthless, and once you showed weakness, the sharks started circling. Late one night, after yet another brutal news cycle, JD sat alone in his office, staring at his phone. The notifications kept coming, news alerts, emails, text messages. And then one message stood out. It wasn't from a donor, an aide, or a journalist. It was from an old friend, someone who had known him long before the cameras, the campaigns, the speeches. "You need to ask yourself one thing," the message read. "Was this just a PR crisis for you, or did this make you realize something about yourself?" JD locked his phone and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time since the footage had surfaced, he wasn't thinking about the headlines. He wasn't thinking about the polls, or the money, or the next election. He was thinking about that question, and the fact that he didn't know the answer. The truth is, no one can run forever, not from their friends, their choices, or the person they are when they think no one is watching. So, if there's one thing to take away from this, it's this: what you say in the dark will always find its way into the light. If you found this story thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe for more.